Welcome to Revo's CEO Capsule Series, part of our digital events program during lockdown. I'm delighted to welcome Roger Wade, CEO of Boxpark, to this episode in our series where we interview leaders in our industry for their thoughts on COVID, leading through a crisis and what the future holds. Roger, thank you very much for coming along. We're delighted to have you with us here today.
Thank you for inviting us, and congratulations on your new role.
Thank you, Roger. As many of you know, in 2010, Roger founded and created the first world pop-up. This was the pop-up mall at Boxpark in Shoreditch, and since then you've created a Boxpark in Croydon and also in Wembley, slightly changing the tone from retail to food and beverage. You're described as a creative entrepreneur, and you believe that all brands are special, particularly those that are independent, which you're passionate about. And you're also passionate about the future of retail and thinking outside the box. So it's great to have you on board, having someone with a culture that's so close to Revo's own culture. And we're going to have a great conversation about retail and what we can expect to see. So thank you very much for coming on board. So you started out as Box Fresh on a market stall, and you became a multinational, having sold Boxpark. You started Box Fresh, I beg your pardon. You started Boxpark and you invented the pop-up mall. Where do you get your ideas from?
It's weird because, you know, just sort of going back in my career, I after university, in my first 3 jobs, I got the sack. So I basically had to employ myself, because if I didn't employ myself, no one else would employ me. And so I've been an entrepreneur from basically my first job since the age of 21, 22. And when I was running Box Fresh, which was a streetwear brand, I built that business over the course of the next 18 years into quite a significant business, sold it to Pentland. But I was just really used to creating product. We used to create like 1,000 products a year. So just creating new things sort of got ingrained with me. It was part of my DNA. And during the time when I was running Box Fresh, I could really see the death of the high street. And this is going back to the sort of early sort of 2000s. And, you know, one thing I always felt quite fundamental about was that people like to feel special. And actually they want to have independence. And there's a psychological need for people to feel special. So when everyone was saying, look, actually there's going to be the death of the high street, independents are not going to survive, I just didn't believe in that, because I believe in the emotional connection of a customer with product. So I just went about to try and set up a high street which was based upon independence. And I'm sort of, to coin a phrase from Steve Jobs, I just believe in connecting up the dots of your life. And I just happened to have a friend that ran a retail development out in America. I used to live in California. I wanted to create a new high street. For some reason, I had this weird fascination with containers because I loved the aesthetics of it. And actually, for me, when I was a young businessman, it was a symbol of success. You know, the day that I could ship all my goods in containers. And I sort of experimented with a container shop when I ran Box Fresh, and we produced a container store. And then one night, in the middle of the night, I literally had that eureka moment. I sort of went to myself, do you know what? I'm not going to have one container store. I'm going to have a whole mall out of containers. And that was the sort of the birth of the idea of Boxpark. You know, the world's, I guess at the time, the world's first pop-up mall. But the concept has really moved on since then. What started out to be the home of independent street fashion and sports fashion, and really getting ready for the Olympics, sort of changed, evolved over time to now we're a food and drink emporium, and we're running events and leisure, and we're constantly evolving as a business.
Well, you're a recognised brand. Everybody knows what you're talking about when you refer to Boxpark. But back then you weren't. So who trusted in you to fund you?
it's a weird story. So when I sold Box Fresh, I was lucky to make a bit of money. So I initially was going to finance all of Box Park Shoreditch by myself, but like many developments out there, you soon go over budget, and it started to get to a stage where it was maybe 50% over budget. And my retail advisors at the time, which were Brian Champion Long, they were also advising Charles Dunstan from Carphone Warehouse fame and now Five Guys. And they introduced us. Charles turned up in his Range Rover to an empty site with one container on there, and just went, "Oh, I love it. You know, I'm not going to lend you, you know, the money. I want to invest in the business." So he became a minority shareholder in the business. I guess the rest is history, really. But it was amazing that he had that insight from the beginning. He just was like, "Yeah, totally get it, right." And it was literally like this. It was like, yes, I think within a week we had the funds in our bank account. I wish it was that easy always.
That's fabulous. Fabulous story. Two creative entrepreneurs together. So how do we ensure that the UK keeps producing entrepreneurs like you?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, I think you just got to have the culture of just that, you know, you've got to have a culture of not being frightened to have risks in life. And the reality is, I think it's those people that are willing to create change that are going to be the most impactful entrepreneurs. Of course, there's going to be entrepreneurs that are going to come along, see a successful idea, and then maybe do an imitation of that. But I think what we really wanted to do is have a breed of new entrepreneurs that are creating new ideas, that are pushing things forward. It's weird because I've been thinking during, you know, this coronavirus time that, you know, that there's no better time to be an entrepreneur, because you are going to have a new world order. We've obviously seen what's happened lately with the share prices of lots of major retail giants. You know, who would have thought that Pret would be in trouble? I mean, that's absolutely crazy. I mean, you would regard Pret as an absolute success story. So what this is going to breed is, I actually believe that the larger businesses are really going to struggle with their overheads, and they're the ones that are going to suffer coming out of COVID-19. And it's going to be new, more nimble, smaller businesses that will be able to grow into it. So I think we've just got to create an environment which encourages young entrepreneurs to be successful. I think that we've got to, as landlords, recognize that the new sort of the future retail titans are the entrepreneurs of today. So, you know, and actually encouraging them to come into our spaces and finding ways for them to come into our spaces is going to be key. So a move towards turnover rent is going to be important. I remember getting my first store with Shaftesbury's. You know, I was, I think, the first ever tenant of the Thomas Neal Centre on the corner, what is now the Fred Perry store. And back then, they were giving me a turnover-based rent. I actually realised it was a very high turnover rent, but I would have started if it wasn't for that. And I actually remained in that store for 15 years. So I think it's now the responsibility of the landlords of today to maybe look at their business model, try to get younger entrepreneurs coming in there and encourage them to come into these empty spaces.
Sure. So we've got around about 200,000 VAT registered retail businesses in the UK, 13% of which are on our high streets, around which communities cluster. We know that there was a structural change happening in retail, and there's every likelihood that COVID is going to accelerate that change, which will mean fewer retail businesses in those high streets. What role do you see pop-ups having as filling the gap, and what other entrepreneurial ideas might there be to ensure that we continue to have dynamic, thriving high streets?
I mean, I think that the sort of pop-up term has maybe become a bit overused. When we were first using the term pop-up, it was really about limited edition product that was available for a limited amount of time. You know, so there was a real sense of, I have a fear of missing out. I've got to go get that product now. I remember going back to Adidas pop-ups, you know, in the late 90s, when you had to get to that store in that week. If you didn't, the product would run out. So I think the problem is now that a lot of landlords have used the word pop-up in order to try and attract tenants in, but without understanding the nature, the demand of a pop-up, i.e. having that fear of missing out and making sure the product is special. So I'm not sure that pop-ups alone can really help the problem. I still think that pop-ups have got a role to play. But I think the more important thing in terms of repurposing retail spaces is really to think back to the customer experience. I mean, I just fundamentally believe I don't sometimes analyze customers in terms of P&Ls and cash flows and footfall studies, XYZ, you know. I use emotional intelligence, and basically I feel even more during this period of COVID-19, what I've noticed is places like the Brighton Lanes that I'm in today, they're absolutely dead without retail. You know, retail is the heart and soul of our community. And we've got to ask those serious questions. Do we want deserted town centres and city centres up and down the country like we currently do right now without retail? And if we don't take serious measures, we will have that. And we now know what the repercussions of that are, because when you go out there during the lockdown period, that's what it's going to be like. So I feel as though we've got to make sure that we embrace retail. We've maybe got to learn a little thing or two from the past. Look at the way Italians and the Spanish really embrace smaller shops. Mm-hmm. So in the end, I fundamentally believe that we've got to remember we've got humans. Humans love social spaces. They love to come together as a community. We've got to make sure that our town centres have got a real community feeling about it. We've got to embrace more hospitality. We've got to embrace more leisure as people have more time, as people want to eat out more. And we've got to embrace smaller independents that, you know, you can get product in that you can't get anywhere else. Why? Because people like to feel special. So you can get something in there that they feel special. But we've got to level the playing field. You can't have a situation. It's a completely ridiculous argument at the moment. I don't even know why we're still having it, that we're not giving business rates relief. The total business rate situation has to be totally reevaluated. There needs to be a level playing field. You know, that is just fundamental. I mean, I think, you know, the government's help in terms of giving business rates relief for the next 12 months. It was one of the first things that they did. But actually that needs to continue, because if not, what we're going to do is we're going to see a world increase where people increasingly buy things from Amazon and from the internet. And do you know what? That's not the world I really want. I don't want my kids on their iPads and their iPhones all the time, and your Androids, by the way. You know, I want us at home. I want us talking to each other. I want to go out in beautiful spaces. I want to go down to that piazza. I want to have that beautiful food. That's the type of towns and cities that I want to live in. And I think that's what other people want.
Yeah, I think it's what we all want for the UK, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think that the experience we've had during lockdown, where we haven't been able to access those community spaces, has reinforced the fact that we do want it, or turned us towards online and made us change our view on whether or not we want that, or we could do without it?
I think, you know, it's a combination, really. So, you know, yes, I think there's an element of some really good things that come out of COVID-19 in terms of the simplicity of life. You know, we don't need to be rushing around all the time. We don't need to be going, you know, I mean, I probably regret saying this, but we don't need to be always, you know, going out and doing things and going to parties or going to clubs or going to cinemas. Sometimes there's quite a lot of simplicity in being at home and enjoying home comforts. And I actually think that's quite good, and spending quality family time where you're actually forced to all talk together and spend time. So that's been absolutely wonderful coming out of COVID sort of 19. But at the same time, during that COVID-19, we also miss the spirits of coming into our town centres. So it's had some benefits. You do miss going to the pub on a Sunday, you know, and having a Sunday roast. You do miss, you know, going into a really nice restaurant. You do miss going to the theatre. You do miss going out for a cinema. You do miss going to get an ice cream or whatever. So it's actually been a combination. Yes, it's encouraged a simple life, but we've also appreciated the other things that we are missing.
Yeah, indeed. Given that we have been clustering at home, and there's been a lot of good things come out of it, I certainly agree with you. How long do you think it's going to take for people to get their confidence back, to go to the pub and the cinema and the theatre and to be eating in restaurants?
Relatively quickly. I mean, I just, like this sort of idea that we're gonna be having social distancing forever, X, Y. I don't really buy into it, and I'm certainly not belittling the seriousness of COVID-19, but in my personal opinion, I believe COVID-19 is something that we will have to learn to live with, as we've had to live with SARS, as we've had to learn to live with flu, and that's not actually belittling flu. Flu is a serious disease, but I think the reality is we are going to have to live with COVID-19 for a long period, but I think we can cope with it, and for me, I remember sort of Box Park trading during the period in which there was a terrorist attack in Borough Market. That was 1 or 2 miles down the road. It's a food market, and yes, we had a period for 4 weeks where people were nervous of coming to Box Park because it's potentially another terrorist target. But you know what? People went back to normal. I remember 7/7. Coming into London on the tube, and in the first month, you're absolutely petrified about oh my God, what's that bag down there? But you know what? It's remarkable. After a few weeks, we all got back to normal. And down in Brighton, I've seen quite a rapid change as well. That 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, no one was really out and about. And suddenly you had some good weather. They were starting to be on the beaches. Then it was barbecues on the beaches. And then things were going back to normal relatively quickly. Yes, restaurants and bars weren't open, but we were starting to get back to our normal social behaviour. So I do believe we're going to get back into normal behaviour. If you look at what's been happening with shopping centres, I think out in Australia when they first opened up, I think it was quite remarkable. I think they were recording record football periods that you normally get at Christmas. So the reality is people want to get back to some sort of norm. Yes, there is going to be some social change, but I think it's something that we're just going to have to live with. But I don't believe in all this doom and gloom rubbish, to be honest.
Delighted to hear that. No doom and gloom rubbish. So tell us, you've obviously had to live through this as an owner and an occupier, as we all have. What have you done at Box Park to see yourselves through the period of lockdown?
I mean, firstly, we sort of looked at it a little bit like a game of Monopoly, for want of a better word, it was about conserving cash. So we very, very quickly furloughed over 90%, 95% of our staff. We were lucky enough not to lay anyone off. And we just kept a core team. I kept working through the period. My accounts team kept working through the period. I sort of made sure to keep in weekly contact with the senior management team, which has been good. So we've actually been in communication at least, and we've had our sort of pub quizzes, your mandatory pub quiz online, and now we're starting to think about coming back, and we're having weekly chats about what's going to happen and starting to plan, when we're going to come back. We're hoping to be open for the first week of July, in line with what the government's plans. We're not really quite sure when. Hopefully we're going to have at least a couple of weeks notice to be ready, and then we will bring our staff back with maybe a couple of weeks before we open, start to really gear things up. I think this has been a period in which you really had to conserve your cash. We make sure that you weren't going through a major cash burn. We were in a lucky position because we could easily survive years without any cash coming in based on our cash reserves, without really any significant borrowing. Whereas, I've been amazed that you've had some businesses out there that have not had cash for a few weeks, and that's it. They're going to the wall. I find that incredible, but that's maybe how tightly those businesses were run. So for us, we believe we're going to come out of this quite strongly. And then we see this as an opportunity to grow, because we believe there's going to be lots of voids left behind in terms of hospitality from some of those bigger businesses that unfortunately have not made it through. And maybe there's going to be some sensibilities when it comes to the rental sides of things. And we believe we're going to be a business that's going to be growing post sort of coronavirus, and we sort of welcome that period. So, you know, we're optimistic about the future. We're conserving our cash while we have to close down, and we're going to be looking to grow coming post sort of COVID-19.
That's really encouraging to hear. One of the things that Riva has been doing has been working with the BPF and the BRC to put together a model of financial support for businesses that have been struggling, so that the pain of no income flowing through to occupiers and the consequences of that all the way through the supply chain, as it were, are actually shared, with government taking a part in that. And you've mentioned the very fast move that government took to allow business rates relief, which perhaps suggests that there's a recognition that something needs to be done about business rates because it is such a drain. What other economic steps do you think government could take to support retail, to ensure that we do have our thriving town centres and high streets that you describe?
Okay, so Vivian, this is the most important thing we're going to talk about today by far. And I mean, if anyone read the Sunday Times this weekend, I think it's probably the biggest point of concern for Boris Johnson's government, with potentially 3.5 million unemployed coming out of the hospitality industry. We don't do something about making sure they survive, not just hospitality, but retail and hospitality and leisure. And I've been working quite closely with Kate Nichols over at UK Hospitality. I know you've been working with her. I'm in a really strange position because I'm a tenant to some major institutional landlords like Hammerson's and Schroders and Quintain, and all of them have been really helpful during this period. But I'm also a landlord to 120 plus smaller independents, and I'm an operator myself, so I can see things from maybe a lot of different perspectives. I have been really concerned about some of the rhetoric of the language used by certain members of certain operators against landlords. I think landlords have also started to hit back with their own rhetoric. And to be frank with you, none of that helped. You know, that just does not help. You know, landlords did not create coronavirus, operators did not create coronavirus, and the government didn't help create coronavirus. So we've got to all work together and find a sensible plan, and we've got to find a sensible plan soon. Okay, so we've got a situation that, you know, in the case of Box Park, we gave virtually from the minute that the lockdown was announced, we gave no rent and service charge holidays to all of our tenants during the whole period of lockdown. Okay, and that was because we saw that as our greatest threat to our business. We weren't really majorly concerned about our own cash. What we were concerned about was our tenants in that period. Okay, but the reality is there's lots of businesses, lots of hospitality, lots of retail businesses that are not going to survive post-coronavirus unless we come to a rental solution. And I'm looking at the help that the government have created, and some of it has been absolutely fantastic, probably greater than what I expected. Certainly the salary furlough scheme at 80%, I think, was very generous. I think probably something like 60% over a longer period would have probably, well, would have probably even worked, but 80% was generous. The business rates was generous, although I think there needs to be a bit more work in terms of upping the rateable value when it comes to business rates. But the way I equate the help given on the salary furlough and on the business furlough, it's almost as though I've had two arms cut off, as per the Monty Python sketch. And, you know, I've sewn one arm back on with the salary furlough, but you know what? I'm going to bleed to death with the other arm, and the other arm is the rent. So this, we have to sort something out on the rent, because we don't sort something out on the rent, effectively those businesses will be forced to go into administration and forced to go into CVAs. And when you get to a situation that you've got a fantastic operator like Pret a Manger actually restructuring all of its rental deals, trust me, there is a serious problem out there. And I think that's the tip of the iceberg. So I think, to be frank with you, you could be talking up to 50%, if not more, of retail tenants not surviving coronavirus unless some sort of rental deal is resolved. So the proposal that UK Hospitality has been working on, which I know they've been in consultation with Revo and the British Property Federation, but the one that I know most about is one in which everyone takes a bit of a hit, which is, and I think buys us time. And that's what we need to do. The initial thing is actually do a bit of triage, sew the arm back on. I'm not saying the arm's going to work, but sew it back on so I'm not going to die for it, and get us a period of maybe 9 months, maybe up to 12 months where there's some rental help. And that might be in the form of what's happening in Denmark, where effectively landlords might, for a period of 9 months, backdated to Q2, give a 50% rent reduction up to Q4, okay? The government then steps in with, say, 25% rent furlough payment, and then the operator is responsible for the balance of the 25%. And that just gives it a bit of time. And how that seems to me to be a fair solution is, I don't think it's reasonable for landlords to expect to get 100% of rent during a period in which tenants are not trading. I don't think anyone really believes that. That's just not realistic. And likewise, I don't believe it's realistic for the hospitality industry or the retail industry to expect to get 100% rent reduction during a period in which they're not trading, or maybe longer. But it's not just during the period of not trading. It's also the period with social distancing. So I think a middle ground in which landlords, just for a period of 9 to 12 months, get 50% rent reduction. The government steps in with 25% contribution to the balance. The operator is responsible for the balance of 25%. And the operator's payment might be a tapered payment. It might be a situation in Q2, the operator pays nothing. Q3, it might pay 25% of its rent and 50% of its rent in Q4. And the government might do the reverse of that. It might pay 50% of the rent in Q2, 25% in Q3, and nothing in Q4. But what does this do? This gives us a bit of time. No one can afford, if at the end of June, when the rent enforcement moratorium ends, no one can afford the wholesale slaughter that's going to happen in retail and hospitality. We all need to buy time, settle it all down. That gives us a 9-month period to settle everything down. I think that it's a realistic rent for the operators to pay. It's a realistic rent for landlords to achieve. I believe government payment should be paid directly to the landlord. There's been enough help given to operators. The payment can go directly to the landlord. And then in that 9-month period, the landlord and tenants can come together under the current code of cooperation and come to a sensible rent about the future. It might not need a sensible rent. It might be getting back to a normal business footing, but at least it buys it time. But doing nothing is not an option. So if you are listening, Boris, if you don't do something about the rent, you've just wasted all your money on the salary furlough scheme, because you're going to get no bounce back, because simply these businesses are going to go into administration. There is going to be up to 3.5 million or 2 million redundancies that will happen out there, and we will get no bounce back, and everything will be wasted. So you have to have a holistic approach to all three of the major costs of the business: salary, rates, and rent. And we need to all stop. We need to come together and get behind a unified scheme and get behind what Revo, British Property Federation, British Retail Consortium, what UK Hospitality are looking to do, and all realise we all have to take some pain and just find a common solution, because the alternative is Armageddon, and it's just daft.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Roger. In fact, the model you describe is exactly the model that we put to government on the 17th of April, since when we have had some conversation with government, but I can't say that it has progressed significantly. And just hearing you talk about it there just reinforces the messages that we were giving to government, very much that the furlough scheme for employees' salaries will be wasted if at the end of the day there are no businesses for them to come back to.
Exactly. And I mean we've chatted to a lot of major institutional landlords about this subject, and our advisors certainly have, and there has been support for this scheme. We've chatted to a lot of major hospitality operators, and there has been support for the scheme. So the support exists, and we knew it was based upon the proposal, the Denmark proposal that was put forward by Revo and UK Hospitality. But we need to get on with it, and we need to get on with it quickly. But we also need to recognise there has been help given to the hospitality side, some help given to landlords, and we've got to stop treating landlords as though they're kings and queens, and their houses are paved with gold. Lots of landlords are running pension funds, and they've got hundreds of thousands of pensioners that rely on their income, and then the repercussions that come from that. So as somebody that works on both sides, I'm just encouraging a middle ground.
Yes, absolutely, and that was what was so encouraging in many ways about the model that we put forward, the Space Furlough Scheme, because it was a joint model that we were coming together and we were putting it forward in that way. And clearly, we need to be pushing harder. So your message to Boris is very well put. That this is a big part of the solution, as you say, along with employee salaries and along with business rates. So I suppose coming through the other side of this, we need to be demonstrating that we can work together, because together we are going to make a better industry. One of the other things that we've been doing, along with UK Hospitality, is developing a code of practice with government to see us through this period of time. I think there are an awful lot of occupiers and owners who are having conversations about compromise and being creative about the ways that they can support each other through what is such a torrid period, so that coming out the other side, we have healthy businesses ready. But that's not always the case. And there are instances of those who don't want to come to the table and are refusing to negotiate. Do you think that the code of practice that is due to be published by the government will make a difference to the culture that really has surfaced during this period of this adversarial tension that's existed?
I mean, I hope so. I mean, I'm really concerned about that culture, really, and I know it's not just me. There's landlords and there's lots of operators concerned about that culture, because there's almost this whole us and them rhetoric, and it's just not helping. It really isn't. It's, and for me, I think we have to look at. I don't think it can be done piecemeal. You can't have like individual landlords. Why should it be Box Park's responsibility by itself, for instance, to offer 3 months, rent and service charge free period, and then other landlords don't do the same? There needs to be a level playing field. It needs to be encouraged, and the way it can be encouraged is part of that code of conduct. I mean, one of the things that I've just seen just recently, which is absolutely alarming, and I don't think people really understand the implications of this, is maybe what's been proposed or has been introduced in California, where effectively they're saying if a landlord and an operator cannot agree new terms, that the lease can be ripped up. Now, I think that's just going too far, because you're effectively ripping up the framework, the building blocks of our entire industry. You can't be an operator if you don't have successful landlords. You can't be a landlord if you don't have successful operators. You're in it together. But the idea of it's just being left to sort out, and if you can't sort it out, maybe you can rip up the leases, it's just going to cause mayhem.
Yeah.
So what we need to do, and the government just can't sit by the byline, because landlords didn't create this problem, as I said, and operators didn't. So they just need help, and let's just create a cooling off period. Let's just create a sensible middle ground that buys time. And I think one of my greatest concerns is the debt enforcement moratorium, which is, the debt enforcement moratorium, I can understand it in the short term, but maybe one of the things that we could do is that if landlords sign up to a 50% rent reduction with its tenants, that effectively they agree to forfeit the tenant the debt enforcement moratorium, because you've signed up to a new rental deal. You've agreed to pay 25% of your rent for a 9-month period. And maybe that can be a bit of a encouragement to landlords to do it. But at the moment, you've got landlords just sort of wondering, what's going to happen if somebody doesn't pay my rent? Am I going to be able to enforce it? And that doesn't make any sense.
No, you're left out in the cold rather, aren't you?
Let's just buy some time. Let's get a sensible solution that isn't just left to individual negotiations. We need a period of cooling off, and then we know what we need to do going forward. We'll sort it out with time. But what we don't need is the pressure of we've got to sort it out before the end of this quarter, which is coming up. And then what's probably going to likely happen is, because they haven't resolve this problem, they're probably going to say, well, extend the debt enforcement moratorium. Guess what? That means you're going to have 6 months debt built up. That's more likely to lead to more CVAs, more likely to lead to more administration, more likely to lead to bleeding to death. Just crazy.
Yeah, with our town centres suffering.
Get it in place now. There's a scheme to follow. Act quickly, act swiftly. We'll all get behind it.
So let's say that were put in place, so that would give us some breathing space, is what we're talking about, really, isn't it? What other changes do you think need to be considered in order to ensure that you've got more of a partnership approach, a reciprocal arrangement, the sort of thing that you're describing that creates successful relationships and successful places? You mentioned turnover rents, which was something that you did back in the day, and I did too. So it's not exactly a new model. Is there should we renew the whole focus on turnover rents? What else should we be doing?
I think the reality is, I think upward only rents, long-term 20-year lease deals, the whole way in which we did valuations and everything. I think all of that has to be reconsidered. So I think the successful landlords of tomorrow will be a lot more flexible in their approach. They'll gain in the upside with their operators. So I do think you'll have a move towards turnover rent. I'm not suggesting that everyone's going to move towards turnover rents. I think you're going to have a natural fallout in the market. The market will level itself off, find its new level. Yes, you're going to have still traditional leases, but I think increasingly you will have a move towards turnover rents, and hopefully the government will create an environment to realise, unless we do something, retail and hospitality and leisure are in real trouble. So we'll hopefully have, complete reevaluation of the business rate system. So I just think, yes, there will be changes in terms of the way we do things. I don't think they're necessarily wholesale changes. I don't think anyone can force a landlord to do something. He's got to make his own mind up what he wants to do. In the case of Box Park, I would say to you that going back after COVID-19, we're going to be offering a choice of either fixed leases or turnover rents. And with the turnover rent, as as businesses do better, we'll get more rental income. As businesses do worse, we'll get less. So people will be given a choice. You can have your fixed lease, and if you're going to be successful in the long term, that's probably a better route to go. That gives us the surety of the income that we get coming in. But we're also prepared to offer you a turnover-based deal, which means we'll share the upside with you, but we'll share the downside with you.
Well, that's the real partnership, isn't it? Do you think that the traditional real estate industry has something to learn from and I'll use the term pop-up, but the pop-up model, which is an agile and fast-moving process because people are in and out that much faster, and it's an inclusive rent. Is that something that we should be looking at seriously for the bigger picture?
I think we should be looking at lots of things. I think there's some elements of the pop-up industry that I mean, certainly in terms of technology, that it almost cuts the middleman out, and you can get a unit directly, with lots of different sites out there, like Here, for instance. I think that's something that the industry needs to embrace. So, I think really, if you go back to the pure essence of the pop-up, which is about experience, I think the experience journey is going to be everything when it comes to retail. And, I think, I'm going to sort of look at that from a different sort of perspective, from a perspective of, what is the future of retail in our industry? Do I believe there's a future for retail in our industry? And I believe passionately that there's a massive future for physical retail. And the reason is quite simple. That the reality is nothing can replace the touch and feel of going into a store and touching that product. I often equate like buying online to watching fireworks on TV. It's not a real experience of going into that store. And you can look back at some of the most technologically advanced companies in the world and track their success from when they invested in stores. Apple invested heavily in stores. Why? Because it knows that content is everything. And what a store gives you is a fantastic ability to actually show content. Do you know, if I pair it back, for 30 years I've been in retail, both sides of the fence, running fashion brand, now being a landlord. We try to make retail really complex, but actually it's really simple. And it's only three things. Doesn't matter whether you're online, and it doesn't matter whether you're in store. I'm sure you're going to get other people going, "Oh, that's great," but let me give it a shot on my three things. Okay. Number one, content is everything. So why do I love physical retail? Because it shows that content fantastic. You can touch and feel the product. Tesla launching its stores in Westfield. It didn't even have showrooms. It only had retail stores because it knew there was great traffic there. So it's a fantastic way to show content. So content is key, and physical stores allow you to show fantastic content, touch and feel. You wouldn't know what that fabric feels like unless you touch and feel it in a store. You can't see that on the screen. And then the next most important thing when it comes to retail is traffic. Okay. Now, actually, it's really hard. Traffic or footfall. It's the same thing. Physical, online. It's really hard to get presence online. It's really expensive to get traffic. That's why, if you look at the cost per click, the PPC sort of model with Google, it costs a fortune. Sometimes it might cost you like in excess of £1 just to get somebody to go onto your website, but you know what? A store is a fantastic way of gaining traffic. Not just getting traffic, but sometimes then you can create interaction with traffic, i.e. you can have social media experiences. That's why you get so many bloggers at XYZ having stores, because they go down and everyone photographs them, and then you get more traffic. So stores deliver fantastic traffic, actually very cost-efficient traffic. That when you compare the cost to acquire the customer in terms of physical stores, some of these big companies like Amazon and everyone, they've realized it's more cost efficient to actually have stores than to try and create traffic online. And then finally, if you've got content, you then got traffic, then the final thing is about conversion.
Mm-hmm.
One of the fascinating things about stores is that if you've got, like, let's say in the world of fashion, like conversion rates online might be typically, say, 1% if you're lucky. 1 out of 100 customers that go online might buy your product. And guess what? They're probably, half of them will probably return it. It's your conversion rates when it comes to stores are like 1 in 10 times better. So actually, stores help with conversion. So if we look at the 3 fundamental building blocks of retail, content, traffic, and conversion, stores can outperform online every time. I'm not saying that there's no future for online. Now, you've not heard that before, but I'm saying that stores have got a fantastic role, I think unparalleled, unrivaled role to create in showing fantastic content, in generating great traffic, in converting that customer. So that's why I believe in physical retail. Will physical retail change? Undoubtedly. Yes, we're going to go and have much more social spaces. People are going to have more time off. People are going to be working maybe from home or co-working spaces more. So, you know, we need to think about hospitality. We need to think about leisure. You know, maybe some big box retailing like retail parks, they might struggle. Yeah, they struggle. They struggle because there's something more convenient than that. It's called the internet. But actually, other forms of fantastic retail, which is all about beautiful stores and experience of it, the Covent Garden experience, they're here to stay and grow.
Roger, I don't think we can improve on that as an ending to this, because I just love the positivity of it. You are such an advocate for physical retail. Thank you so much, Roger, for taking part in this Revo CEO Capsule series. It was wonderful hearing what you had to say, and I hope that we have many more conversations like this.
Thank you very
much. Thank you.